Hare Krishna devotees. So tonight's lecture, we're very fortunate to have Her Grace Malati Mataji with us. Malati Mataji is one of Srila Prabhupada's early disciples, and tonight she will share with us some of the memories of Srila Prabhupada, speaking about Srila Prabhupada. So kindly sit down and enjoy the class. We request that if you have cell phones to put it in the silent mode. And thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Well, that's really loud. So this won't be a lecture, but it will be, actually it's a 12-minute clip, movie clip, but there's pause and start. And at different times it will pause and I'll speak about the incident and the persons involved. And in each case, it will be involving His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Om Ajnanatimurundasya Gnana Sakalaya Chakshun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paskachudisa Charine Tvamna Sundar Chito Ratra Dustaram Nistitir Satam Kalim Satvanara Haram Pumsam Karnadara Ivarnavam Srimad Bhagavatam 1:122. We think that we have met your goodness by the will of providence, just so we may accept you as captain of the ship for those who desire to cross the difficult ocean of Kali, which deteriorates all good qualities of a human being. This verse was introduced to me and my husband, Shamsundar, by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, in very early 1967, late January. We had each taken initiation, and then we're married by His Divine Grace, the second wedding in ISKCON, in January 17th, on January 17th, a few days after he arrived in San Francisco from New York City. Each of us separately had dreams where Srila Prabhupada, or Swamiji as he was then referred to, appeared. And in each case, it was quite significant that we agreed immediately upon his beckoning to do something that was not something we would normally have done. So we were curious about that, and we took our dreams to him. And he told us that, yes, sometimes the spiritual master does appear in dreams. And then he recited this verse, this beautiful verse from the Bhagavatam, that we think that we have met your goodness by the will of providence, just so we can accept you as captain of the ship for those who desire to cross the difficult ocean of Kali, which deteriorates all good qualities of a human being. And he seemed pleased that we had immediately accepted him as captain of our ship. So I'll read, and then you can tap it to start it, and I'll tap you when this starts. That'll be our sign language. So Prabhu here is going to help me because of the stopping and starting. When I do it, I inevitably crash the wrong keys and I'm not so technologically great. So this is the beginning. And I want to give credit to Vishaka Devi Dasi for putting this little segment together. 2 years ago, we toured South Africa for 2 weeks as a prelude to going to India and making this presentation at the International Leadership Sangha. So 2 weeks, it means every day, every night, sometimes twice a day in different cities in South Africa. And then flew to Calcutta and 3 days of presentation there and then on to the ILS. Following that, we were in Vrindavan and Delhi by request. And since that time, we have presented together and separately in other various locations. Last Sunday, we made the presentation together in ISKCON Silicon Valley, and apparently it was on some kind of televised situation because I started getting letters from all over the world saying, yeah, I just saw that was so great. So I hope that you'll also appreciate, as did our audience that was present and the one that we couldn't see. So for your question regarding women, I have always accepted the service of women without discrimination. This is a letter to Guru Das in May of 1972. You should turn. Srila Prabhupada's Shower of Mercy. Here is Jamuna Devi Dasi, personally assisting Srila Prabhupada in the installation ceremony of Sri Sri Radha Landaneshwara, who were the first large Radha Krishna deities to be worshipped in ISKCON. Previous to the installation, using his own small Radha Krishna deities, he personally taught her the art of deity worship. This is a photo of Srila Prabhupada with Janavi Devi Dasi, who was one of the early artists that were instrumental in the paintings that were part of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and later on Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc. Srila Prabhupada understood that the Western audience in particular, but in general people in Kali Yuga, were not too prone to just sitting and reading a book of philosophy. And he reasoned that having these beautiful pictures, which he termed the windows to the spiritual world, would capture their attention and assist them in understanding difficult philosophical aspects. So Janavi has first made a sketch, Janava, she's made a sketch and she's showing it to Srila Prabhupada. And this was quite common because he would then correct anything that he felt was not accurate and give them great details how to complete their paintings. Here's Jyotirmayi Devi Dasi, and this is taken from a very large program in Paris, France. Jyotirmayi Devi Dasi was the person who translated all of Srila Prabhupada's public lectures. She was the first person to begin translating his books into French, And she became so proficient at translating that even though Srila Prabhupada did not understand French, when she spoke, he would understand her. And sometimes he would actually even correct her French. She could take the lectures back to the devotees who weren't able to attend the programs and from memory repeat them to the devotees. And in this process, she became very familiar with Srila Prabhupada's extremely thoughtful way of detailing the philosophy. You can see you can see how large that program was. Pause. In India, all the acharyas and their descendants later on acted only from the man's side. Their wives were at home because that is the system from old times, that women are not required to go out. But in Bhagavad Gita, we find that women are also equally competent like the men in the matter of Krishna consciousness movement. Please, therefore, carry on these missionary activities and prove it by practical example that there is no bar for anyone in the matter of preaching work for Krishna consciousness. Letter to Himavati, December 69. Keep going. And the lady with the glasses is Himavati Devi Dasi, early pioneer. So the lady in the previous slide and the lady here is Govinda Devi Dasi. Both she and her husband served Srila Prabhupada intimately as secretary and personal servant and cook. So she would walk alongside Srila Prabhupada as he would take a morning walk, noting everything he said, and then later transcribe it and present it to him for his approval. He also dictated letters to her, which she would then transcribe and present to him for his approval and signature. But the point being that Srila Prabhupada equally engaged all of us, as he would say, both boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, to use his terminology. And we never felt any lacking or support from Srila Prabhupada. This is Jamuna Devi Dasi, and this area is at John Lennon's estate on a morning walk. In Bombay, Dina Dayadri. We would all be present on the big programs on the stage. Take a pause here. So this is, on your left side is Madhuri Devi Dasi, and she was the wife and then the widow of Tamal Krishna Goswami. On the other side is Srila Prabhupada with a little toddler named Saraswati Devi, who happens to be my daughter, who is now 49 years old. And behind, of course, the happy mother, and Bhakti Denise, who became Draupadi, and her little son, who became Dhruvananda. But in this little incident here, I was cooking for the devotees' breakfast prasad, so I couldn't normally go out on a morning walk. On the other hand, my little daughter was very anxious to go out with Prabhupada, and she was jumping up and down in our little apartment enclosure. And there was like swinging doors, the top part and then the bottom part. So I would have the top part open, but she was so small she couldn't see above the ledge. So she was jumping up and down, and she grabbed the handle and the bottom part open, and she ran out and grabbed Srila Prabhupada's hand. So Prabhupada looked at her and he said, "Saraswati, you're not properly dressed." because she had, indoor slippers and she didn't have an overcoat on. You can see Prabhupada, he had these rubber boots we called Wellingtons, and a big coat, a shawl. So she wouldn't let go of his hand, but she turned around and looked at me and in unspoken words, bring my jacket, bring my boots. And even when I brought the jacket, she wouldn't let go of his hand. She put the one hand in the armhole, and then she grabbed with that hand, and then she let go to put the arm in the other sleeve. But so much affection was there between Srila Prabhupada and his disciples of all ages. And everybody had opportunity of leading kirtan. Even myself, who is not known as a kirtan leader, he would just say, "No, you sing." Madhuri is helping with the fire yagya. And over here again, this is again Jyotirmayi. She was also the head mistress of our Gurukul in France at Nouvelle-Mayapur, the chateau that was in southern part of France. And she's sitting under a gigantic tree where Srila Prabhupada also sat and took darshan and gave initiations when he was in Nouvelle-Mayapur. And this same tree was present during the French Revolution that was 200 years earlier. So we can safely say by the grace of Srila Prabhupada sitting underneath this tree served Srila Prabhupada with his shade, and Srila Prabhupada's presence liberated this tree. Is this thing too loud? Because it seems like there's an echo. Could it be turned down a little? So this lady here, Dr. Sharma, met the devotees in our early part of our beginning the ISKCON movement in India. The ISKCON movement in India was not started by Indians. It was started by the Western devotees. So we were sent there upon the order of His Divine Grace to begin what he called the World Sankirtan movement. And Dr. Sharma met us early on when we were living right across from where this picture was taken. It's, if any of you are familiar with Bombay, that part of the, along the driveway, there is this mosque that's out in the ocean, if you're familiar with that. So this was in that area. And we were living in an apartment building, one of the early high-rises, but meaning at that time it was 7 floors tall, had an elevator, and one of the tenants had a vacant place. So we were there along with the deities that are now being worshipped in Juhu. That was their first home in Bombay. And she would help us immensely, particularly because we were sick quite often, not knowing how to navigate the cleanliness issues that faced us in those days, which mainly was lack of water. You had to fill the water tanks at a certain time when the water would be running, and if you didn't fill the tank, you were without water. And that happened to us quite often, so you can imagine our situation. So this is Vishaka Devi Dasi, who put together this segment, and along with her husband Yadubar have produced that wonderful, wonderful film that I hope you've all seen, Hare Krishna, the movie. So here she is receiving Gayatri Mantra from His Divine Grace in Mayapur. But I'd like to let you note that she came to India as a young woman and an atheist. She was raised an atheist, and she preached atheism to her friends. And she met her future husband, John, who was also a photographer. He got an assignment to go to India and do some little segment on this merging Hare Krishna movement. So he met us in Bombay, and he suggested, and then he also traveled with us to Surat, and he suggested that Jean should come over and join him. So she came without any ambition to become a follower of a strange sect. She came to join her husband. And they had a plan to photograph the essence of India. So she told me that when we first met, and she came into our place at that Akash Ganga building, and I asked her, "Why have you come?" "I've come to photograph the essence of India." And I laughed and I said, "Well, you've come to the right place." But later they told Srila Prabhupada that they wanted to film an Indian village, take pictures. And he said, "You'll just get cheated. Everybody will steal everything from you. You don't speak the language and they don't speak yours. But if you want to photograph an Indian village, go to Vrindavan." And that's where her heart began to change. So she came to India as an atheist, and here she is getting Gayatri Mantra. This is the power of His divine grace and His shower. Make a pause here. Now you can see she's walking there holding this camera. That became her passport. She could go anywhere because she had the camera, and she was the unofficial official photographer. And one time I asked her, what did you learn on these walks taking photographs of Srila Prabhupada? And she looked at me and very seriously she said, "I learned how to walk backwards very fast." Because to take the picture, she had to be ahead of the group of devotees. So, anyway. This is Srila Prabhupada doing the first arti at Bhaktivedanta Manor. And this is also on the grounds of the manor. This is a little shop that the devotees set up across the street from the LA temple, and they would buy produce wholesale, and then they had a little shop there where the devotees could come at a good price and get fresh produce. So Prabhupada expressed interest to see their setup, and he's taking darshan there. Here was a kind of a typical evening in Juhu when we finally got Hare Krishna land, but before the temple was built. So we would be, some of us, camping in tents on the land, literally in tents, intensely camping in tents. And there were some members of the colony that lived there that gave Srila Prabhupada quarters in one of the buildings that was there. In the evening, he would come up on the roof, and anybody could come. His students are members of the housing cooperative that were there. And these little girls would quite often come very spontaneously and dance for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada. This lady in the blue sari, I just found out who she was, and very wonderful lady. And her daughter grew up, they became staunch followers. This helped Prabhupada so much. And then her daughter is now married to the son of Yogeshwara. And so it's very amazing how Srila Prabhupada touched the lives of so many people. So this lady had two sons also. And just this year, one of the sons, both sons were very devotionally inclined by the example of the mother. And she, of course, was influenced completely by Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON. So both sons, 16 rounds a day, younger, early 20s, and they were traveling by train, coming from Gujarat back to Mumbai. And you know how the trains stop, you get off, get on really fast. Somehow or other, the one son, somehow he didn't make it on the train, he got hit by the train, and on the spot, his head was broken open. And his brother was there with him, chanting, and the other son with the broken head, he chanted to his death on the train platform. Now you can imagine how terribly tragic that was for the family. And somebody had expressed to the lady, her name was Mrs. Warrior, their condolences. And she wrote such a beautiful response, praising Srila Prabhupada for giving her the opportunity to become Krishna conscious and practice Krishna consciousness, and that her children in turn had become Krishna conscious. And that at the moment of the death of her child, he was fully enveloped in Krishna's holy name. So even though it was such a tragedy, she felt great peace at heart to know that her son was completely in the hands of Krishna. And that was by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. This is in Dallas. We had our first Gurukul there. Srila Prabhupada would come and hand sweets to the children. In fact, some of the children who were very young told me later that they didn't even know his name. They just called him the Cookie Man. Behind this little girl, Chandramukhi Devi Dasi, is her mother, Nandarani Devi Dasi, who, along with her husband, Dayananda, were in charge of the school and the deities. When Srila Prabhupada arrived, the curtains to Radhakala Chandji were closed, and Nandarani was thinking, but he'll want to see the deities, so she rushed into the temple room and opened the curtains, and just at that moment, Srila Prabhupada entered. And she was expecting he'll definitely say something about the deities, but what he said was, Nandarani, you are here. And when she heard her spiritual master speak like that about her, she immediately had tears bursting out of her eyes. And another devotee, Aditya Devi Dasi, who was right behind Srila Prabhupada, started crying also to see this sweet, loving exchange. And Aditya Devi Dasi was a lifelong servant of Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON, and just within the last 6 weeks, she left her body in Sri Vrindavan Dham. So Ali Krishna Devi Dasi, just as her god sister Jyotirmayi was translating in French, Ali Krishna Devi Dasi was translating for Srila Prabhupada into Italian. And this is in Rome, this picture is in Rome, and she was the first translator of his books into Italian, and to this very day she is still translating his books into Italian. Her husband, Madhusevata, is head of the BBT in Europe. He's also a GBC person, and he is also on the list to take sannyas next year, having completed successfully their family life and a grown-up Krishna conscious son. Jai Chicago. So this is a picture in Calcutta, India. Kushalya Devi was one of the younger ladies who came. She just was barely 20 when she arrived to join our Indian Yatra. And all of us were given assignments by Srila Prabhupada, which included giving classes. So here we are in the Calcutta temple. The altar, which you can only see the lower half, Radha Govinda, their worshipable deities are there. And then right next to Kashaya is Tulsi Devi, but you can just see the little corner of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa sign. Now the layout's a little different. Now the Vyasa sign's in the back end of the temple. But Srila Prabhupada would ask his students to give class, both men and ladies, and he would sit and listen to our classes. But this tape of this particular photo is included because sometimes in some places it's thought that ladies shouldn't give classes, but that's now not how Srila Prabhupada taught us, and that's not how it was during his time. So far as boys or girls lecturing in the morning, that doesn't make any difference. Either girl or boy devotees may deliver lecture if they choose to do so. We have no such distinction of bodily designations, male or female. Krishna consciousness is on the spiritual platform. As such, anyone who is a devotee of the Lord, following in this line of disciplic succession, can deliver lecture on the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And this was a letter to Shamadasi in October of 1968. Shamadasi was the wife of Hayagriva. Nobody knows who this little girl is, but she's getting some unlimited mercy there from His divine grace. Nitripta and her husband are in charge of the archives. So here's Kim Waters, 20 years old, very, very accomplished artist, and also kirtan leader and bhajan singer. But she, on her own volition, made an illustrations for the Bhagavad Gita, and she brought them to Srila Prabhupada for his approval. And he was so pleased with her, this young woman who just on her own initiative began this beautiful project. And one of the books, Light of the Bhagavat, he personally requested to be printed. At that time we were using Dai Nippon in Japan. So that was a book that was one of the early books that was printed that was not Srila Prabhupada's book, but that he requested to be printed. So this is Janaki Devi Dasi. She is the first initiated lady disciple of Srila Prabhupada in the first initiation in New York City, along with her husband Mukunda, whose head is kind of chopped off there with the red beads. But there's a very sweet pastime here. In general, Janaki had no awe and reverence. She was just so affectionately attached to Srila Prabhupada, to Swamiji. And he was likewise very affectionate towards her. It was a very reciprocal relationship. She would cook for him. She would try out something new, and she'd run up and say, "Try this, Swamiji, try this." And he'd say, "What is it? Just taste it. Do you like it? Do you like it?" No formality. So when he informed us in January of '67, after being ill for a number of weeks and not recovering, he decided that he would return to India. Generally, if you're not well, being at home or on your home turf is healing. The climate is known to you, the smells, the sounds, the food. Even by Ayurvedic standards, it's recommended you convalesce in your own place. So he was going back to his home, Vrindavan, to convalesce. And we were just desperately torn apart. If you watched the movie, you saw that segment that, he was leaving, and just what a time it was for us. And he hadn't even left, and we were just, feeling the impending separation. And he was sitting there holding his ticket. In those days, you had physical tickets. And she came up behind him, and she grabbed his ticket, and she goes, "Now, Swamiji, you can't go. I have your ticket." So there's another picture, what you don't see, he's looking up at Mukunda with his eyes kind of large, like, "Mukunda, do something," because you never knew with Janaki. I mean, you don't know, she might tear it up, And so then she gave it back to him, and you can just see both of them smiling very broadly to one another. This was at our little, this was in England. This was our first place that we began having programs with Srila Prabhupada when he first came over. It was in Conway Hall in London. And on this particular occasion, you can see everybody's up. So what happened that night was he had given this kind of a, you might say, a classic lecture. You're not this body, you are spirit, soul, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The soul is intended to bring pleasure to Krishna. And after that talk, then there was this kirtan. Now, we didn't have our own transportation, so we had hired a car that would take Prabhupada, Swamiji, from John Lennon's estate into London. That's where we were staying at the time, was at John Lennon's. And after the talk, and then the second kirtan would occur, he would leave, and the rest of the devotees would stay distributing prasadam and talking to people. So I would also go with him back to John Lennon's, myself and my daughter, along with his secretary, servant, Purushottam, and I would cook his evening, some little milk and puffies or something like that for dinner. So that night, after the talk, Jamuna was actually leading the kirtan, and he started singing on top of her kirtan, but he was singing the song about Narada Muni. And at first Jamuna didn't quite catch it, but she was looking like, what should I do? And he was saying, keep singing. But he was chanting the song to Narada Muni, and then he stood up and he started dancing. And then I noticed, as did other people, that he was dancing, but his feet were no longer touching the stage, like he was levitating. And that's me there in this lower, with the arms up. It was just like this kind of totally mystical moment. But members of the audience also saw that. It wasn't just like we were the only, everyone saw it, and so they stood up too. It was just like an electrifying moment. Then, the kirtan ended, and as if nothing extraordinary had happened, he said the Jai Om Shri Vishnu Parapara prayers, and he left, went out to the car. So I was already in the car, because myself and Purushottam and my daughter who was still like a little baby, she was about maybe 2 at that point, we'd be in the back seat, so he wouldn't have to wait for us to get in the car. So the driver, who never ever showed any emotion or any interest in what was going on, he opens the door, he does his duty, Prabhupada gets in, he shuts the door, then he goes around to get in, and he gets in the car, he puts the key in, and then he paused, and he turns to Prabhupada and he goes, "Well, Prabhupadre," call him Prabhupadre, "you got a little out of control tonight, didn't you?" And then he nudged him with his elbow. And we were kind of shocked at that. And then he turned the key, and then he paused again, and he goes, "But it's just like you said, this car is no good without a driver." So he got the concept of the body and the soul, that the body without the soul, there was no value. Hare Krishna, Shri Shri Radha Kishore Kishori Ki Jai. Oh. Prabhupada could communicate exquisitely to people of all ranks. This was at our place at John Lennon's, our little temple room there. Shuddha Kirti back there. So take a little pause here. We can see in this car Srila Prabhupada, and in the back seat is Jamuna. And she's in the back seat of this car that is about to depart for Vrindavan. This was after a very strenuous 10-day Pandal program in Delhi. And Jamuna had just gone all out to serve Srila Prabhupada nicely in this Pandal program. She obtained beautiful, beautifully carved deities from Jaipur, took all details of the deity worship were done by her. And in fact, those deities that were at that program are Radha Gokulananda, who are now at the manor. But at the end of that 10 days, she was just like physically exhausted. And Prabhupada noticed that. And he knew that the rest of us, we were going on a bus. It was a really fancy bus. It was air-conditioned. Air-conditioned in that there was no windows. There were no glass in the windows, so the air was flowing through. So he knew it'd be a little kind of a rough ride. So he said, "You come in my car." So he had that care and concern for the devotees, and it was always exhibited. And again, as ladies, we never felt any lacking for his care and attention. I also want to point out the watch. Srila Prabhupada was very conscious of using Krishna's time wisely. And a few years ago, some person came up to the GBC when we were having our meetings. We had an open day. And on that open day, anyone could come and express themselves. So this young man expressed that he thought GBC members shouldn't wear fancy watches. And I was thinking, that's strange, because most of us did not have fancy watches at all, you know, like maybe Walmart type of fancy. And I just felt I wanted to say something to defend my fellow GBC members, so I stood up and said, I don't think that we, the GBC devotees, members, are wearing very fancy watches, Mine came from Walmart. I know Tamahars did too, And then this guy pipes up, he goes, well, Gopal Krishna Goswami has a Rolex, like some kind of sinful activity, And then Gopal Krishna Goswami says, but Srila Prabhupada gave me this watch. And this is the watch that he had given to Gopal Krishna. And, 40 years down the line, that watch is still ticking because he's taken such good care of it. My little daughter at the time. So Madhura Devi Dasi was along on our excursion to Varshana. You can see Srila Prabhupada in one of those palanquins, and you can see that it's his own disciples who decided they would carry their guru up that hill. Unfortunately, it kind of became like a Jod Bharat story, jiggling and jostling, to the point where Prabhupada finally said, okay, that's enough, now let these other men do it. And Madhura Devi Dasi was 17 when she joined, 17 when she was married to Tejo Das, who became temple president in Delhi. Now, Tejo was not known for being easy to get along with. And here was this young girl who was just like a Gandharvika. She could sing beautifully, she could chant beautifully, played the mridanga expertly, kartals, cooked like an angel. And one day Teja goes to Prabhupada and he goes, I want to take sannyas. Prabhupada looked at him and said, why do you want to take sannyas? And he said, "My wife won't do what I tell her to do." So Prabhupada said, "Oh, your wife is a very intelligent girl. You do what she says." You can actually just tap that, I think. You do it, I think. Again on the roof in Juhu. So take a pause here. Anybody want to take a guess about that that little model up there? This is a large program. Pandal program means a huge tent is erected, and we would advertise, and thousands of people would come, and Prabhupada would lecture nightly. So this model, building model, was on display. Does anybody have an idea what that might be? Huh? Yeah, it's Mayapur, but more specifically, this was the first rendition of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. As you can see, it developed over the years. And there's Kushalya leading the kirtan for 100. This was in Radha Damodar Temple. Srila Devi Dasi was also personally taught deity worship by Srila Prabhupada and was the head pujari for years in LA. And again, Govinda Dasi serving her spiritual master. Airport arrival. Take a little pause here. The devotee next to Srila Prabhupada, Manmohini Devi Dasi, had the dubious distinction of being the first widow in ISKCON. Her husband was killed, and she was 22 years old with a 6-month-old baby daughter. So after some time, she was thinking, well, you know, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to do. I'd like to have more children, but she didn't say anything to Prabhupada. She was just wondering what she should do. Her brother was also an initiated disciple, and he understood his sister's mind, and he said, let's go to Prabhupada. So they went upstairs, and Prabhupada greeted them. They made their obeisances, and before they could open their mouths, he said, "So, do you want my opinion?" What are you going to say? If you say no, but if you say yes, are you ready for it? But she said yes. So he said, it didn't work the first time. What guarantee is there it will work a second time? Just take care of your daughter and bring her up to be Krishna conscious, and that will be your perfection. So she did that. And then her brother was saying, well, I think she feels she needs some protection. And Prabhupada looked at her and he says, you do not feel protected? And then he looked at her brother, you do not feel protected? He looked at the other devotee, you do not feel protected? Because the reality was our protection was Srila Prabhupada. And the Hare Krishna Mahamantra and the service to the deities. Sometimes we'd get a little confused. Jamuna was recording Srila Prabhupada. He was singing Bhaja Hare Mana. Take a quick pause here. You may notice that the saris are basically two colors, with the exception maybe one white one, basically kind of a saffron color or a yellow color. So this was during an era that you might remember Sham Sundar mentioned when we went to UK. Actually, by the time we left for London, the yellow canary era had already started. It began when a thoughtful young man bought a bolt of cloth, white cloth, and he brought it to Prabhupada in New York, and he said, you know, this way the devotees can all have garments that, you know, match up and look alike. Because literally people would say they look like they're wearing sheets, and the reality was most of us were wearing sheets. We just tear them in half and wrap them around. So you can imagine what that looked like. So he got this bolt of cloth, and Prabhupada said, all right, dye it saffron. Now here's a communication issue. This person was a cook, and he knew if you put saffron in the milk, it turned yellow. So he dyed that cloth yellow, and he brought it to Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, being a practical person, he looked at it and he said, well, the grihastras can wear it. In other words, don't waste the cloth, grihastras can use it. But that was translated into, Swamiji said, grihastras must wear yellow. And even though we had no telex, we had no internet, we didn't have cell phones, that message went all around. Like, next thing you know, we were just like, and the unmarried ladies and gentlemen, you know, we wore the saffron color, and that was just standard at that time. Now he's teaching Gauri Dasi how to worship her Radha Krishna deities. And she happened to be one of the largest, most humongous book distributors. It was during Bhagavad, it was a Bhagavad Dharma discourse, and Chandravali Devi Dasi was actually not married at the time, but she got Srila Prabhupada's permission to begin brahmacharya ashrams. Which was, this picture here has a little historical reference. So, Rukmini Devi Dasi, Jamuna, Saradia, Mukunda, myself and baby Saraswati, and then over there is Govinda Dasi, and the woman in the back, her name was Malati. But this was happening here is that Rukmini Devi Dasi was getting initiated, and she'd come with us. She flew with us from San Francisco to Montreal, and we were on our way to London. And before going, we were given Gayatri Mantra. When we landed in Montreal, I remember Himavati came and she said, you're going to get second initiation. We didn't know what that meant. And I asked, what does that mean? And she goes, more mantras to chant. I had this 6-week-old baby, and I was, oh my God, you know, trying to get through 16 was enough. Anyway. Now, including this picture is included because somewhere down the line, there was some kind of a change in the mode of operation and how we would relate with things in ISKCON. But during Prabhupada's time, everyone, men and women, did dandavats. It was just a normal thing. And you can see, there's Prabhupada, there's the ladies, and, you know, flat out. Somewhere down the line, some men got some idea into their minds that the women should do that, but it wasn't the mood of Srila Prabhupada. When my god sister Krishna Kumari was initiated in New Vrindavan, she was the last one, and she was a little late because she was in the kitchen cooking. So they called her out, she came up, got her beads, got her name, and did a short obeisance and started to back out, and Prabhupada called her back with his hand and went like flat out, dandavat, you know. So ladies, Go ahead. Stop at the next, let this, now stop it. So you saw the two ladies that was on the roof of a large temple that used to be in Manhattan on 55th Street. And during that time, that temple had a theater in it, and there was a drama group. And Prabhupada was so enlivened by the dramas that this group was doing that he wanted them to fly all around the world performing, but we could never afford to send so many people at once around the world. Another thing the members of the drama troupe would do would go out daily on Harinam Sankirtan. And then they would stop at a street corner and do like a instant drama on the street. So here was a part from one of their more famous enactments, which was The Age of Kali. And Rasa Gya played sin. So one time they put that drama on in the temple. Prabhupada was there, he watched it. And after the drama, some of the brahmacharis went up to him and said, Prabhupada, we don't think Rasagya should be playing sin. Prabhupada didn't say anything, and they were blah, 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 blah. And he picked up a rose, and he was turning it in his hand. So when they were finished talking, he looked at them, holding the rose. He said, you see this rose? When a karmi, when a non-devotee sees a rose, immediately they want to enjoy. They want to give it to their girlfriend so they can enjoy with her. But when a devotee sees a rose, they want to take it and offer it to Krishna for his pleasure. So he corrected their mentality, and the dramas continued with Rasagya. She also played roles like Draupadi and Kunti, you know. This is in Jaipur, where we had a big program that was organized by two ladies, and that's where the deities of Radha and Govinda were installed for the first time and worshipped before coming to New York City, and also where Tamal Krishna took his sannyas vows during that program. It was in 1972. But the whole thing was organized by two ladies. This was in the airport in London. Prabhupada. Even with my daughter, Prabhupada would call me up to speak. Here is the cornerstone laying ceremony for Hare Krishna land ISKCON Juhu. And there is Srimati Devi Dasi, who's personally assisting Srila Prabhupada. We are Vaishnavas. We are not concerned with male or female position in life. That is simply bodily concept of life. It is not spiritual. Whether one is male or female, it doesn't matter. Simply chant Hare Krishna and follow the four regulative principles, and your life will be perfect. Prabhupada's letter to Jennifer in February of 1975. This is Mukhya Devi Dasi, who is the temple president in Alachua, the largest ISKCON community in North America. And So, the end, but not the end. We hope it's always the beginning, because that's what devotional service is. It's never ending. It's continually being enacted by the devotees, serving Lord Krishna by the loving mercy of Srila Prabhupada. And hopefully just in seeing these few pictures, hearing some of the little stories behind them, maybe you'll find another aspect of Srila Prabhupada that you were not aware of previously. We all know Srila Prabhupada, the Acharya. We know Srila Prabhupada, the author, the philosopher, so many different titles. But Srila Prabhupada, the person, is another wonderful, enduring aspect of Srila Prabhupada. And it is our hope that you might have perhaps caught a glimpse of that aspect of Srila Prabhupada through this small offering. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. If anybody has any quick questions, I'll turn around so my back isn't to you.
Thank you so much, Malati Mataji. Obviously, we all know that some of the things that has been in the controversies that we see right now, especially in India, in terms of how lady devotees are being, in one sense, limited like that. And part of the presentations I see that addresses some of those issues. How is that advancing in terms of, I see it yourself taking that important type of service as well, Vishaka Mataji. We had her here shortly, and she also was bringing these types of points.
Yeah.
What do you see?
I have a little difficulty hearing because I'm deaf and there's a little echo. Could you repeat just the question part?
In terms of the controversy of the opportunities that female devotees have in ISKCON nowadays, especially in India, how advancement do you see in terms of change?
Yeah, well, obviously these controversies about the roles of ladies didn't exist in those days. We felt embraced by Srila Prabhupada. We were empowered by him to serve according to our capacities and abilities. But the bottom line is we all have to make a determination in our life. And it's not about role or position, it's about service. So some of these things will naturally have to be ironed out. In 1990, 91, I was a temple president. I was the only lady temple president. And when I went to the temple president's meeting in Dallas, they have a yearly meeting, so I went there in 1994 for the first time. And they looked at me and they go, "What is she doing here?" So somebody, well, she's a temple president. And I won't say who said, "Oh, you mean that little house in Ohio full of women?" We have deities, we had Sankirtan vans going out. We had another temple. We had 5 nights a week programs, outreach programs. That house full of women. Yeah, that house full of very active Krishna conscious women. and we were never felt inhibited. Now you have a wonderful temple president here who happens to have a female body, and I'm sure that you're not finding any lacking in her administration. You know, in 1998, I was voted on as a member of the GBC, the first person in Asari to sit at that table. Now there's a second lady, and Praharna, for all intents and purposes, is the GBC of, with all due respects to Bhakti Bharg Maharaj, she is the GBC of Canada. She does all the requirements, you know. Anyways, so there's openings, it's happening, but I wouldn't let position stop anyone from being engaged in Krishna service. Because my being a GBC is not going to take me back to Godhead. It's my consciousness and the mercy of Srila Prabhupada that figure in that. You know. So be ready with opportunities. I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention there when Rukmini was getting initiated, well, somewhere at that point, it was either before the initiation or afterwards, Prabhupada was telling a room full of young boys and girls, go out and open temples. And Rukmini raises her hand, she goes, even the women, even the ladies? And Prabhupada said, yes, why not? That was a mood. So I would pass that on to you also. You open a temple. It doesn't have to be a great big temple. Get a little house, get a little room. Do something practical. As Prabhupada said to Himavati, prove it, that there is no difference between the men and women in the matter of devotional service. Prove it by practical activity. Go out and distribute books. Go out and just make friends with someone and teach them about Krishna consciousness. This is a movement of preaching and teaching, and there's no barrier for that, you know. So some things definitely need to be adjusted, and I'm sure they will be, but don't let that stop you from becoming Krishna conscious. No. No. Okay. Any other questions? No.
We have been hearing so much about Srila Prabhupada, like in this whole presentation. I wanted to ask if you could share something about the first experience you had with Srila Prabhupada.
About
the first experience you had with Srila Prabhupada.
the first experience, yes. Well, that was in, actually you could say it was in late September of '66 when I was first shown the Srimad Bhagavatam. And up until that point, I had no interest in having a guru. My boyfriend, Sam, had a big interest in it, but I just told him, if you want to have somebody tell you what to do, go ahead, but I want to make my own mistakes. I had a typical stupid American woman mentality. But when I saw the original versions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, those three, if it's first canto and 3 volumes, that changed my heart and my mind about thinking that I didn't want a guru. I wasn't fully convinced, but I got strongly convinced that I wanted to meet the person who authored these books. Because not only was these books showing something significantly different, because there weren't other books around in those days, and here was something real. People would get up, so-called gurus, and they would just say so many weird things, and the weirder they said, the stranger it sounded, people would go, oh yeah. I mean, you couldn't understand what they were saying, but the least you could understand it, they would think, oh, he must be very wise. Whereas Srila Prabhupada was very clear. There was no mystery to what he was speaking. And that was really refreshing. So the first meeting, when he arrived in San Francisco, in our little storefront, which was just, of course, we always say, they were full up, they were packed. Well, of course, because they were usually very small, they weren't big, spacious places like this. They were more like the size of your lobby. But it was packed up with all kinds of people. Just like here tonight, we see many different types of persons. But there was a predominance of hippie people, and hippie people like to dress up as other personalities, usually famous personalities who are dead, like people like Jesus Christ or Pocahontas or Geronimo or, some kind of personality. And so we had a lot of personalities in the room. Then there were people like suit and tie types. There was casual types. And nobody knew what to expect. But you must know that the hippies had a philosophy that was kind of like loosely based on love and peace. So just like we say, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Peace, these hippies would go, peace and love, brother. Peace and love, sister. This is like the peace symbol. So you can imagine what they might have thought when the first thing they hear out of Prabhupada's mouth on this first day here in San Francisco was, there is no love in the material world. I mean, their whole thing is based on love. He's saying that there is none in the material world. And then he began to explain the nature of love, divine love, coming from the Supreme Lover, Lord Krishna. And I was feeling such relief about this message already, because everybody was looking for love. There was even a song, looking for love in all the wrong places. Like it wasn't happening, and people were miserable. But nobody wanted to really admit it. Srila Prabhupada, there's a saying, he gave us the straight sauce. It wasn't adulterated. And as he was speaking, we were feeling, coming from him, just great love. We felt love emanating from him. And many of us started to fall in love with him at the same time, I think you should put it on the table.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you for coming and listening. Thank you very
I
much.
have one question, like when all the personalities like you all associated with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada used to give instructions of doing some services which sometimes appear to be impossible to do. So how did you and others accepted the instruction, and what convinced that this is, though seemingly impossible, can still be possible? Yeah. How did you made that effort, or how it happened?
We wanted to please Swamiji. We wanted to please Srila Prabhupada. You might say in one way we wanted to become like him in terms of his beautiful character, his beautiful, he was just such a beautiful example of all the wonderful, fine qualities one would expect in a saintly person. And he never misled us, he never cheated us, he didn't say one thing and do another. Rukmini mentioned that in the film, So we weren't always able to clearly understand instructions immediately, but we wanted to follow, we wanted to emulate, and we wanted to please him. And it's still the same today. every morning I ask him, how can I serve you? You know, and I try to somehow get through the day in that consciousness. You know.
Do you have any recommendations for preaching now, in this time?
He's asking if there's recommendations for preaching now at this time. Just as it was in our time, Prabhupada said, go out and preach. We got initiated. He's just, 5 days into his arrival. I mean, honestly, we could barely say the whole mantra without looking at a little piece of paper. Go out and preach. So I said, how do we do that? He said, just listen to what I am saying and repeat. Don't add, don't subtract. So in the same way, hear Srila Prabhupada, listen to his tapes, read his books, speak to others, and be bold. Go out and give it. Don't worry if they get it or don't get it. Just give it to them. And just like we give prasadam, they taste it, just give it to them. But give it to them, don't slam them. You don't have to slam them, you don't have to bam them, but give it to them. People are getting cheated right, left, and center, and our country is going to hell, like the whole world's going to hell. I mean, nobody needs to tell you that, it's evident. So there's a urgent need for this message of Krishna consciousness. And by coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada, by accepting initiation from one of his representatives, we have an obligation to repay him. And the best way we can repay him is by giving out this Krishna consciousness knowledge. The Guru Dakshin, sometimes you're thinking this Guru Dakshin, you go out and you put it up and you get a cloth and you get a bunch of money and you give it to the Guru. That's one kind of Dakshin. But the real Guru Dakshin is to follow the instruction of the spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada is our Param Guru. All of the spiritual masters in ISKCON are his servants, and they'll always be his servants. The best way we can please Srila Prabhupada is to preach this message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And to do that, you also need to be convinced. So in order to be convinced, if we follow the prescription he's given, was following the regulative principles, our 16 rounds, reading daily, Bhagavatam class daily, discussing with each other, Harinam Sankirtan. There's nothing lacking, And we shouldn't feel intimidated because, I don't know what the population is here in Chicago, but there's not a whole lot of us here in this room. So it means there's a lot of people out there to be reached, So sometimes you may think, whoa, maybe kind of intimidating. What is it? We're just a few of us. Well, get out there, increase the numbers. But don't be intimidated, Be bold and be fearless. You have something to give. So just go out there and give it. Srila Prabhupada came here. We all know that story. It was a very bold thing to do at his age and in the situation, very bold. But he did it. And you can too.
Thank you, Mataji. A little bit like Giridhari is asking how to do that. Before Prabhupada was living and his image was really strong, Prabhupada, by all means, lives for us that are devotees through his books, but convincing the people is a little harder than if we would have his image, not his image, but the living person itinerating in the way that he did it, and that was a strong statement. The situation is as bad or probably worse than when the hippies began,
Oh, yeah.
when you lived
Yeah.
those times. And now, well, it's just terrible. But
We have to be very attentive to keeping Prabhupada's presence in ISKCON, because I see little ways it gets chipped away. So the best way you can do that is to know Srila Prabhupada, to understand his teachings. And there's so many, just like those wonderful media presentations by Yadubar, and there's the Prabhupada Memories series by Siddhanta. Get to know him. Read the books by his disciples. It'll give you courage. It'll give you insight. Read the books called Shistakarita. It's three volumes, I think, his letters. In it, they have it categorized, so about any topic you can read. Here's what Prabhupada did. Here's how he did it. Here's how he thought. And you're saying, yeah, it's hard to convince people. Well, it was always hard. There was one morning walk series, which, by the way, is a great, among the audio series, they have these morning walk series. So generally, the morning walk series were his closer people, the ones who are managing the temples, his close soldiers. And so he's instructing them during these walks how to deal with different aspects of running this movement, because after all, he was going to be turning this movement over to basically a bunch of kids. So in one of the walks, he's listening, and one of the young men, it's hard. People don't want to take the books. They don't want to listen to us. All the same things you might experience in today, right? So Prabhupada stopped. You could hear him. He stopped. His cane hit the ground. He said, "Do you think people are going to line up and agree with you? You think they're going to line up and agree with you?" He said, with his cane, "Therefore you must preach. You must read these books, study these books, so that you can preach and convince them. Just like a lawyer, he studies the law books. He knows chapter and verse, and he can defeat his opponent. You must preach." Yeah. Thank you very much. All glories to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Her Grace Mata Malati Prabhu ki jai.